So layoffs in tech companies are continuing. This week and last week, Google and Amazon did some massive layoffs. Today or yesterday, Spotify also announced a big round of layoffs. So the story of layoffs in tech companies is still ongoing. But are these layoffs in tech companies going to continue or not? Let's try to find out during this video. Hey, Juan here. Today I wanted to talk about the tech layoffs or the layoffs in tech companies. If you have not noticed or if you are new to the channel, I have been recently part of these layoffs. 2 weeks ago, I received the great news that I was not going to be continuing in the company. And if you want to see the reasons why, I will link the video in the description and in the pinned comment. There are many places where you can track the layoffs that are ongoing, but of course those places are not going to tell you if there are upcoming layoffs or not, or where they are going to be. But I'm going to link those resources down below because I think that they are quite interesting and quite telling of the trend that we are going. And the layoffs seems to be still growing and pretty much getting more and more layoffs all the time. But how do you prepare for potential layoffs in your company? Or how can you identify if the company that you're working on, are there signs that are going to tell you if there's a possibility of layoffs happening in the company? Let's talk about those. So the first sign for me that is quite telling of potential layoff is if the company is not transparency about their finances. If the company doesn't tell anything or much about revenue, how much money they are spending, how much money do they have left in the end, basically what is their profit, simplifying in a way, of course. If you don't understand this, if you don't see or understand how much runway a company has, especially if we're talking about startups, that is a kind of a worrying sign that the company might be hiding the numbers and not trying to tell what is the kind of financial situation of the company. That, for me, it's a very big red flag. And yes, some startups are not going to tell all these numbers because of different reasons, but if there is no understanding of how much or how well financially the company is doing, that is very worrying. The second is that there's no clear strategy. As a product guy, I love to have a strategy and understand that, hey, we have a vision as a product, what we want to offer, what is the value that we deliver to our customers, how are we going to get there? What are those big steps that we have to take in order to get to that vision? If there is not a clear strategy defined in the company, that is a very concerning sign. That means that the company might have funding, might have had the money, especially if we are thinking about startups, but they don't know yet what to do with it, or they don't know yet how to get to that vision. This happens more often than not, and this is a very big issue at this point when companies are not getting funding rounds. Many companies, obviously, and many startups are not successful over the years, but this happens over time and probably they dry off or they die off slowly over time. But now when there are big slashes on the money that they are receiving for funding, it's very critical and the company might go busted really fast. Or at least teams or parts of the company. And even more worrying is when you combine this lack of a strategy with defining a ton of OKRs, so objectives and key results. If you're defining objectives and key results without having a clear strategy, you might be defining the wrong objectives. So without understanding where you want to go and how you want to go there, you should not be putting too many objectives because you still don't know where you want to go. So that's a very big problem. When you have objectives and key results like number of people that need to be hired or, I don't know, number of lines of code or unit tests that need to be implemented. Those are just basically vanity metrics that they're not going to tell anything. They look great when you put them there. It's just, we have OKRs, but in reality, they're not telling you anything and they're not telling anything about the success of the business. Number 3 is that the company is not profitable. This is a very big problem at this point, and this is why many of these big tech companies are being affected, is because they are not necessarily profitable or some parts of the company are not profitable. And VCs are pushing for profitability now at this point. And also the management teams, obviously. And this means that they want that those companies and those products are profitable. If the company or the product that you're working is not profitable, that might be a potential risk for layoffs. Number 4 is that everybody in the company seems to be running, doing a lot, but you just perceive a lot of chaos. So maybe this is in your team and not necessarily the whole company or the division that you're working. But when you have this feeling of panic or panicky situation where there's not like a clear control, that is for me a red flag of the situation or the clarity of what the company is doing. This obviously is very linked to the lack of strategy in the company or in the product. Number 5 is that the product that you're working is not yet in the market. Okay, your company might be profitable, but maybe the product that you are working in is not yet in the market or is just losing money, even if it has been released to the market and has been for a while. At this point, companies might be cutting their losses and cutting all these products that maybe they don't have a product market fit, or products that are actually not yet in the market and they just want to kind of be safe. At this point, no more investment, no growth at this time, growth will come later. Those are potentially a risk to be cut and potentially be affected by layoffs. Number 6 is that you have been in a hyper growth company that is scaling up really fast, really growing the team super fast. And you notice that there start to be cuts in the budget. Like contractors or consultants that were brought in are suddenly leaving the company, or teams are being affected here and there, but not like a very big, massive layoff at this point. But you start to notice that, okay, the budget is suddenly just being restructured, and probably even some of those teams, especially with the consulting part that had been brought into the company, that's being cut off. That is a telling sign that not everything is maybe as healthy as it was. And of course, not a definitive sign for having layoffs, but something that you should keep in mind, especially if combined with other factors. Number 7 is that there's a hiring freeze. Okay, in this situation and in this kind of economical global situation, let's say it that way, many companies are going to do a hiring freeze, and that not always leads to a layoff. I want to make that very clearly. I have been in hiring freezes in several times in different companies, and there was no layoffs after that. And actually, that was a good way for the company to just kind of postpone maybe or prevent the having to have those layoffs. So that's not necessarily a telling factor. I think that this, in combination with others, that could be a potential problem or a red flag of potential layoffs. Number 8 is that HR or your manager starts asking you about your job, about what have you been doing, what is the performance, what are the things that you are delivering, how is the value that you're bringing to the company, and so on. That is potentially a red flag, again, if combined with many other things of those potential layoffs. I would say that this is probably a big red flag in any case if your manager or HR comes to ask you about what job are you doing. That means that either people don't see the value of what you're doing, or you have not been doing enough work, or that is never a very good sign. So just pay attention and maybe start looking for other opportunities at that point. So these are some of the risks or the red flags that I have noticed or pay attention to when thinking about the potential layoffs. To be honest, in the previous company, I was paying attention and noticing some of these things. Not all of them, clearly. This has come from different experiences that I have had throughout my career. So not all of them were in the last company by any means. But I never thought that the situation would go this fast right now. I thought that it was going to evolve over time. And I was already thinking that maybe I had to be paying attention to new roles and new positions. But I gotta admit, I was a little bit lazy. Having said that, I think that if you think about these signs, probably none of them on their own are going to tell you if there's going to be a layoff. But a combination of them, and if you see quite many of these situations in your company, potentially that means that there's going to be layoffs. The reality is that we are also in this economical situation. That is what it is. The central banks are still raising the interest rates. The VCs have stopped or slowed down, let's say, a lot, the funding runs that they are doing. And that means that the situation is quite shaky. Obviously, we probably are going to go into some kind of recession. If it's going to be mild or hard, that's to be seen. But the reality is that most likely layoffs are going to continue. The question is how much layoffs, if we are thinking about tech, they are going to happen and continue to happen over the months. Tech, because of the situation and being very focused on growth, was the first one to be affected. What you start seeing on the news is that they're starting to talk more about how other markets are going to be affected, about layoffs, about so for example, retail and so on, that at this point had not been so affected. Is that going to move towards those markets or those industries and move a little bit away from tech? Unclear, but the reality is that there has been really big layoffs already in the last week. So I would be surprised that all those layoffs stop. So what I would recommend at this point is pay attention to the potential red flags in the teams that you're working. Look a little bit on the ones that I have talked about now and do your own research. Don't just trust a random YouTuber talking about these things. Even if I have been one of these people that have been affected by layoffs. I'm not an expert in these things, and I'm just talking about the things that I think that you should be paying attention to when being in the work or being in your role. Basically, and obviously, this is something that I'm going to take into account when I'm going to be interviewing for next roles. Is that I want to make sure that the company that I'm going is not a company that potentially is going to have a layoff right away. How can I tell? No, I can never tell. That's just the truth. But how can I prevent, to the degree I can, or prevent it as much as possible, try to foresee it and try to be informed in the decisions that I'm making about the company that I want to join? Basically, this is what you could be doing at this point. Try to make a list, understand where you are at. Is it a risky situation or not? If you think that it's not, that there are just some hiring freezes and something like that, and maybe some budget cuts, but nothing else. The product that you're working is profitable. The team that you're working is working in things that customers really need. Potentially that's not going to be affected by layoffs, but you never know. If you start to see a combination of many of these other things that I just talked about, then in that case, start to think and maybe do a little bit more research or try to assess if doing a career move would be clever or not at this point. Do your own research, as always. As I said earlier, I was affected by one of these layoffs at Utopia Music 2 weeks ago. If you want to hear the story and how I'm trying to actually overcome this situation, go check out this video. I will see you in the next one. And remember, stay safe.